Right, Professor Jimmy Licon, welcome to Solicited Advice.
Thanks for having me on, Joe. Good to be here.
Oh no, I'm so excited. This is going to be an absolutely fantastic conversation. Philosophy is often said to be something related to knowledge. Like many people, if you were to ask them what the point of philosophy is, it would be to know things. And I think one of the most interesting things about your work is that you've talked an awful lot about almost the opposite of that, the value of sometimes not knowing things. And this is, to a kind of uninitiated person like myself, this struck me as absolutely mind-blowing. Could you talk a little bit about when it is better not to know?
Yeah, I actually have a book coming out pretty soon. It's called Better Not to Know. Why Knowing Less is Sometimes Best. Yeah, actually, might start at the beginning. I think it was 2020, 2021, and I was living in Louisiana at the time. My wife and I had traveled to California for Christmas to spend time with my family. And we drove instead of flying because of COVID. We figured we'd bump into fewer people, that kind of thing. So we ended up staying a few weeks, and I was putting together like a unit for my class on culpable ignorance. This is when you are ignorant of something and you're blameworthy for it. You can imagine people like doctors or lawyers, police officers who should know things and don't, and then cause harm to others.
Mm.
And so I was putting together this unit, and it occurred to me. I thought, I wonder if there's any such thing as culpable knowledge, because there's culpable ignorance. So I thought about it a lot, and I thought about things like someone ruining a movie ending. We call those spoilers. We don't want to know those. Punchlines to jokes. I'm notoriously good at butchering those. And like one of the ways to butcher a joke is to ruin the punchline or to say it up front. Um, and so I just thought, okay, cool. So I wrote an outline about it and put together a couple of sample chapters and sent it off, and it ended up getting accepted or getting. I ended up getting a contract. But yeah, so I dove into like economics and politics and personal lives and even morality. And it was shocking to me how many areas in which we actually don't want to know too much. So one of my favorite ones that I love to give is relationships. So if you are in a relatively healthy relationship, and I mean a romantic one, but it doesn't always have to be romantic. It's often good at the margins to know a little bit less about your spouse. So maybe thinking your wife is a little more beautiful than she actually is, or your husband's a little more charming than he actually is. That these actually go a long way toward like decreasing divorce, increasing marriage satisfaction, and really just improving the quality of the marriage. There's a lot of caveats that apply. So one of them is this doesn't seem to work if you're in a toxic marriage. So pretending like your husband doesn't have a drinking problem, for example, is probably not the road to a successful marriage.
Hmm.
And it has to be minor. So it has to be like, it can't be some fundamental flaw in your partner that you're completely ignoring. It's got to be something at the edges, something where you exaggerate a little bit or you downplay it a little bit. Um, but this can carry over to other relationships too. Um, Friends, there's a lot of philosophers have thought that we have certain obligations to friends, sometimes to ignore things about them or to not inquire further, or to maybe be a little bit epistemically irrational when it comes to our interactions with our friends. But there's a whole host of them. It turns out people in politics that know more tend to be more partisan and tribal. I'm
Really?
not sure doing the work there. Is it that they know more that's causing it, or is it because they're tribal they end up knowing more? I'm not sure. But that knowing more can be like a fodder for defending the sort of ickier parts of their political coalitions, for example. So there's like a
Oh,
whole host of ways in which um, knowledge makes us worse. So whether it's as a moral agent, whether it's as like a regular agent just in our practical lives, or even when it comes to knowing things. So there'll be cases where like it can make you worse as an epistemic agent too.
right.
But
Okay.
I mean, there's a whole bunch of topics we get into there.
Let's say that's a lot of exciting avenues to go down. I'd be really interested to push on that epistemic point because intuitively that seems to be the one that I can kind of imagine situations where knowing a bit less might improve my personal relationships. And I know I want to come on to the ethics stuff and the political stuff, because I think that most people have a very close link in their mind between knowing more about the world and being able to be a better person and do better things and be more kind of, we're constantly talking about how to combat misinformation and get people to be better informed citizens. The idea of the informed citizen is such a hallmark of democratic theorizing. So in what sense can knowing less make you better at these things like ethics and politics?
Well, there's a few of them. So I'll start with, I wrote a paper called Better Not to Know. It's sort of leaping off point to the book. And it's based on a study they came across from 2019. I'm not sure how robust the study is, and it's sort of we could even treat it as like sort of a toy example if we have to. So it may or may not be empirically sound. Like sometimes these studies don't replicate, but basically they found people who were very partisan politically will have a difficult time taking information from others, even when it's non-political. So maybe finding out someone is a Republican will not only turn you off to their politics, but it will turn you off to them for like in other ways as a source of information or knowledge that has nothing to do with politics. Like maybe I find out the guy down the street is a big Trump supporter, and that turns me off to such a degree that I ignore his plumbing advice to my detriment. Like maybe he knows more about plumbing than I do. And so these studies found that people, even being offered a financial incentive, would disregard non-political information from partisans on the other side. Not everybody does this, but there's a certain type that does. So in a situation where like knowing something more about somebody turns me off to them, even though in other areas they would be a good source of information, that seems to make me a worse knower. Like when it comes to knowing things, when it comes to exploring the world, discovering things and learning things by testimony, which is basically how we learn most things, like scientific knowledge, historical knowledge, geographical knowledge, these are all things that we learn by testimony. Completely disregarding a source because of their politics, even when it comes to the non-political stuff, seems like a really bad epistemic practice. And and especially if it's triggered by like knowledge, that seems like that is a kind of knowledge that for someone who's wired that way. So not all of us, like not everybody, but for people who are wired that way and have that disposition, that is information they are better off not knowing because it actually makes them worse agents. So you see this a lot in politics. This is all over the place. It's called epistemic spillovers. Is what they're called. So when knowing something sort of spills over into other areas, it contaminates it. But there's lots of other examples, but that's definitely one. And I think it's like when I talk about knowing less being a good thing, it's kind of easy to see maybe morally how not knowing certain things, like knowing someone's secrets that I shouldn't have known or something. In fact, one of my first big rejections from a journal was like, we see the moral angle, we see the practical angle, we just don't see the epistemic one. So it really forced me to think, how can there be knowledge that actually makes you worse as a knower? And come to find out there's quite a bit.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It reminds me, I was reading a paper by C.T. Nguyen the other day on echo chambers, and one of the roads to which people become insulated from information that doesn't kind of agree with their particular presuppositions, kind of information getting discredited in advance. And one of the kind of offhand comments he makes in this paper, which I was like, actually, that's very insightful to just kind of toss off that, was that a lot of the time the discrediting information is true. It's just that they're not being given the crediting information as well. Like, it's actually very easy to give perfectly reasonable discrediting information of particular sources in advance if you don't also give the kind of the times where they've got things right.
Yeah, it might even be like a sequence. Like if you were to find out that your next door neighbor is a Trump supporter after you found out how much they knew about plumbing and how helpful they were, that you might discount the Trump information, or you find out someone voted for someone you consider to be morally obtuse, But it's, but yeah, I don't know that that's been studied. It may have been. I don't know, but it would not surprise me if there was a like a sequencing bias, like when you find out something and when you don't.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, I part of the reason that I'm really interested in culpable knowledge is partly because um, I guess I'm sort of like the economist Brian Kaplan, in the sense that I look for really weird topics and weird angles. That's sort of my
Mm.
thing. And for the longest time, epistemologists have focused on like the nature of knowledge, the definition of knowledge, how knowledge is valuable. Philosophers talk a lot about that, but we don't really think that much about ignorance. We do a little bit, but it's not um, sort of just taken for granted. Like it's the opposite of knowledge, or it's bad, or
Mm.
like and sort of without giving a thought. And it's turns out it's actually way more complicated than that. Like most things in philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, what have you found about kind of the nature of ignorance in looking into it?
Well, there's a lot of different schools. So um, the philosophers that have talked about it, Rick Peels is one. He's a big one. Um, he's mostly a descriptive approach to ignorance. So he sees ignorance as you're describing someone's state of knowledge or lack thereof. He's also got, I'm trying to think, is it him or somebody else? He's got a view too where I don't think it's him. I think it's another philosopher. I forget their name. But basically, the idea is to be ignorant is just to lack the relevant true beliefs about something. So there's a debate in the descriptive camp between whether or not ignorance is just the lack of knowledge or it's also the lack of true belief. So you might think like to be ignorant of a topic is just to not know anything about it. Um, that's the standard view. But there's like the new theory of ignorance, which says to be ignorant of something is to not know true beliefs about it too. So it's not just knowledge. And they're on the descriptive side. They're only describing ignorance, not really evaluating whether it's good or bad.
Mm.
And then you've got people like Duncan Pritchard, who I've gotten into some exchanges with him. He thinks ignorance is bad. So it's not just that we're describing the absence of a state. It's also a normatively bad state. It's an indication of intellectual or epistemic failing, I guess how he puts it in his
Mm.
pieces. Um, and he has basically two arguments for that. One is he thinks that one of the ways you get ignorance is through some sort of failure in your reasoning or not properly attending to sources, that kind of thing. But he also uses like a usage argument where he says if you look at the way people use the term, we tend to not just mean when we say someone is ignorant that they're lacking information. It's that they're lacking information that they should have. There's sort of a
Mm.
normative, evaluative component to it. I talk about this a little bit in my intro chapter,
Mm.
but I just think he's wrong about that. I think he's like 90% of the time, I think that's probably right. We do use it negatively, but we don't only use it negatively. And that's really
Mm.
the key to his argument. So he gives a bunch of examples. Um, like not we don't like you or I not knowing the grains of sand on a beach, he wouldn't consider that ignorance.
Mm.
But he might if you were a geologist studying that beach and it's your job to know it. That
Mm.
might then constitute ignorance. Um, Whereas I think, yeah, there's plenty of cases where we use the term ignorant to mean something negative, but I find some in the book. There's plenty where we actually use it sort of descriptively or neutrally or sometimes even positively, like ignorance is bliss, for
Mm.
example. Um, so yeah, just like I used I think it was ChatGPT to just like look for a bunch of like forums and sources that I actually found too. I was just careful not to let ChatGPT like hallucinate things. So it had to be things that you could actually find, like on like Reddit or various forums, like parenting forums, or like things like I want sort of organic use cases where people use the
Mm.
term ignorance, but they don't mean something bad. Like you're not failing in your duties as a knower or something.
Yeah, the one of the really interesting examples you bring up is the efficacy of not knowing and not even reflecting upon the potential consequences of your actions in certain situations. Which I think again I'd love to chat a bit about that because again it seems so Like one of the things that at least I was told as a teenager a lot, and I feel like lots of teenagers are told this, is, think before you do things, think before you speak. And you gave a really fascinating set of examples of times where actually we positively evaluate people specifically for not doing this.
Yes.
And I think one of the best things about it is they're not very far-fetched examples. They're examples that everyone in the audience will have come across before.
Yeah. I've actually got the idea from Better Call Saul. So in the first season of the show, episode 4, it's called Hero.
Mm-hmm.
The I don't know if you would call Jimmy McGill the protagonist or the antagonist, but anyway, guys, Jimmy McGill is setting up a law firm and he's trying to get attention. So he stages a worker to make it look as if they're falling from a billboard. They need to be rescued. The ones on the freeway that are like super high up.
Mm.
And so, without thinking twice, and not even considering his own safety, he seemingly rushes to this worker's aid, much to the celebration of the locals, and he gets on the news and yada, yada, yada. And you think, well, why does that work? Why did Jimmy McGill sort of rushing to the aid of this worker, why was it so praised? And this is where, sort of thinking about it, and I'd already kind of know a little bit about the reputation literature and moral psychology and economics and how it relates to signaling. So it turns out there's some pretty good evidence that what's going on there is that people are making a pretty quick calculation. They're probably doing it unconsciously in most cases. It's something like, if this random person couldn't even be bothered to think of themselves first, they're so altruistic that they threw caution to the wind and, without even thinking about it, went to the aid of someone else. By the way, and there's usually costs involved in doing something like this, jumping into a river to save somebody, rushing into a burning building, sort of the classic rescue cases, where these sort of anonymous schmucks just seemingly out of nowhere do something really, really cool and thoughtful and altruistic. That this is somehow a very good signal of their moral character. And if you don't like moral character, they're like moral dispositions.
Mm.
How they're disposed to behave in certain conditions. And this is something about, how much you can trust them, how benevolent they are, what kind of people that they would make as far as like members of your community. Is this someone you want to cooperate with? You know? But yeah, it turns out there's quite a bit of really good literature. There's a psychologist. So she got her PhD at Harvard. I'm trying to figure where. I forget where she ended up. I want to say Princeton, but that could be wrong. But anyway, her name is Jillian Jordan. She's a really cool moral psychologist, and she works on this like reputational dynamics, like what reputational interests will like sort of do, what it explains. And very ordinary everyday cases that you might find puzzling suddenly become less puzzling or really quite clear when you think like, what is the value of running into a burning building or jumping into a river or, well, among other things, it makes you look pretty damn good, right? People often don't forget it. It leaves a mark. It is hugely beneficial for like finding fellow cooperators. And people will often be very generous. Sort of like I had a buddy in grad school who used to kind of sort of do this. Whenever he'd go to the bar, he would always buy the first round
Mm.
because he said everyone remembers the guy who bought the first round, and like he drank for free for the rest of the night. So, sort of, you bought the first round, guy. And he said, plus, memories fade as the night progresses. But it's sort of that same idea. Like everybody remembers the guy that came to the aid of some random, you know, construction worker on a billboard
Mm.
who, like, Jimmy presumably had no obligation to save this guy. Yet, without nary a thought, he rushed to his aid. It's all staged,
Mm.
sure, but it worked, and it worked for a reason. So that'd be
Mm.
an instance where stopping to think, because the suspicion is, I suspect, with people, if you stop to think, are you just thinking of your own skin? Are you being generous only when it helps you or benefits you?
Mm.
Are you the kind of person that would stop and think about whether or not to keep your promises to me? They might be
Mm.
thinking, right? If I was in a relationship, if I was your buddy, if I was your lover, if I was your, family, if I was your neighbor, would you like would you stop and think first before you acted? Um, there's also, and you'll see telltale signs of this in philosophy too. So if you think about Peter Singer's very famous drowning child thought experiments,
Mm.
we're walking along the bank and we spot a child drowning in the river. There's no one else, or the lake or whatever. It's shallow enough that you could save this child. There's no one else around, and their demise is imminent if you don't act. And acting on your part will be costly, but not fatal. You might ruin your clothes or something. Um, I don't think it's a coincidence that it's like first a child,
Mm.
so like helpless. There's nobody else around. It falls on you. But I think the most important element of it is its urgency.
Mm.
Do you even have time to stop and think? Are you going to sit there and calculate? No, you act. There's
Mm.
a urgency built into the thought experiment. And I don't think it's a coincidence. I think that's because there's a certain, I don't know, intuition about the purity of your moral cognizing if it just gets the right answer immediately. It's not a product of calculation, it's a product of character.
Yeah, I think because
Right?
once I kind of read this in your work, I started seeing it everywhere. Like I thought about the kind of the demand for like authenticity in people like politicians and other kind of public figures, right? I think part of what, and I was like, that's, if we thought about authenticity there as a kind of unthinking action, like what, I don't know, summed up in the phrase act naturally, right? You just kind of whatever happens to come to mind, you just say. That sort of seems to be
Mhm.
very, very similar. It's like you don't want to see the calculation going on. You just want them to be, revealing their perfectly natural way of acting without any kind of artifice. And it seems like a very similar thing, the guy that rushes into the burning building without pondering first, oh, I don't know, is the person in the building, am I going to make it? Am I not going to make it? Or even more nefariously, maybe something like, oh, I wonder how rich the person that I'm going to save is and whether they'll give me a reward. I suppose these are the kind of things that you could, at the very least, from a third person perspective, imagine them thinking at the time. And the only way to be sure they've not thought any of them is if they just book it into the burning building and throw caution to the wind.
Well, I mean, and the problem with these things is they're heuristics.
Mm.
So, like, you get someone who's really smart, very high IQ, they might be able to very quickly run through these calculations in a way that makes it look from the outside like they haven't done a lot of thinking and calculating. So it's gotta be, I mean, these signals are particularly, reliable in cases where it's like a super weird situation or it's not clear they were anticipating it.
Mm.
You might think in other situations where they're not particularly quick on their feet might add to the evidence that this is spontaneous and not just quickly calculated. But there are definitely limits to it, right? So I think of it more as a heuristic, that can be gamed. It's, like, obviously gamed in Better Call Saul, it's gamed by politicians. Um, this is what they do, like, rehearsals before they do debates to seem spontaneous. Um, and I think that signal is probably a lot less trusted in that case because we know there's prep work that went into it. Whereas the Jimmy McGill case, you've got a bunch of strangers and, like, they've never seen this guy before,
Mm.
and they presume he's never seen construction worker before. So it's doing a lot of the work there is, like, not only is Jimmy doing it without thinking twice, but he's presumably caught off guard. This is not a man who's had time to prep and look as if he's spontaneous. Now, of course, it's all staged, and we know that as the viewers, so we're sort of chuckling to ourselves and like, they've been suckered. But you can see how, like, as a social heuristic, it's pretty good. Like, it does pretty good work.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine for most people, if it seems like they haven't thought about it and they're just booking it into the burning building or whatever equivalent situation is, they probably haven't thought about it. This is probably this is
Yeah,
probably pretty good most of the time.
yeah. In fact, I think, based on the epistemic vigilance literature, I think you could arguably say that if it didn't work most of the time, it just would have fallen by the wayside.
Yeah.
Like, like, it just got gamed to death, people would just stop you relying on it as a signal. So the very
Mm.
fact that people use it so much says that at least enough of the time it's doing the work that it should be.
Yeah, I mean, this links with kind of a theme in your academic work actually, which is the kind of use of signaling theory from psychology and applying it to various different philosophical or just kind of general concepts. I mean, one of your kind of most popular Substack posts is on a kind of defense of virtue signaling as signaling, both in terms of its inevitability and its benefits, right? And that's another example. We talked about you're kind of defending certain kinds of ignorance earlier. This is another sort of much maligned public concept. And I'd love to hear a little bit about A, why you think it's so maligned, even though that's kind of a more intuitive case, but also B, why you think actually it has real benefits and why it might be kind of inevitable anyway.
Yeah. I think I sort of wonder if part of that, I got my start at UC Davis as a philosophy, like a little budding philosophy student back in the day. And I remember going to a department talk and hearing a bunch of people in the Q&A, like a lot of faculty members had shown up to it, and they were talking in the Q&A. And there was this one philosopher named Bernard Molyneux. He's no longer there, but he got tenure there, and he ironically gave up tenure and moved to Europe. So he's one of the few. Most people do not give up tenure when they get it because it's not, unless they're getting tenure somewhere else, which he did not do. But I noticed in his questions and his interactions with other faculty members that he was like a philosopher's philosopher, if that makes any sense. Like the philosopher that other philosophers would consult. And he was always such a weird outlier. He always came at people from like left field. His objections were always odd. And I remember watching him at the time, and I was taking a class from him. It was called Minds, Brains, and Computers, and he commented once, the best way to learn something is to watch people who know how to do it really well and just copy them. So I took that to heart. So I watched a lot of faculty members, and he was the one that I ended up mirroring a lot and taking a lot of his classes. But it just stuck with me that there was such power in seeing what other people didn't see, and that even philosophers are subject to groupthink. We have blinders on. They're human beings, so it's not surprising. But trying to what is the angle everybody is missing? They've walked over this territory 20,000 times, and no one ever saw this thing. So I think that's where I get that urge to be like a contrarian. But even amongst philosophers, it bothers me when everyone agrees. That there's nothing in the world that bothers me more than when a group of seemingly intelligent critical thinkers all think the same thing, or at least seemingly so. But yeah, I maybe that's there's anyway. So I've like 1,000 thoughts going on at the same time right now, but I think that's where I get that urge, and I didn't know that it was so obvious in my work, but apparently it is. So I think that's why I pick these projects. I got to talk a lot about it, but I will just quickly say my next book idea that I'm starting to begin to craft is on the value of parasites, predators, psychopaths, and free riders, like people and organisms that we might think of as just mostly extractive in a negative way. Turns out there's actually quite a bit of benefits to them, and the kinds of benefits that philosophers should care about. So I guess that would be another example of what you were talking about.
Yeah. And I think that, one of these much maligned concepts is this idea of the virtue signal, of the person who talks a big talk about being very moral and virtuous. And, I've heard different people kind of cash out the question of whether they cough up the goods in the end in different ways. For some people I've spoken to, it seems like it's constitutive of the concept that they don't cough up the goods. For others, they're agnostic on the coughing up the goods point. But either way, this kind of figure of the person who spends a lot of their time loudly and proudly declaring their own moral virtue, or indirectly declaring it through great signals, is something that a lot of people have complained about. And it's a surprisingly bipartisan complaint. I've got kind of left-wing friends and more conservative leaning friends, and they all complain about virtue signalers. But again, you've kind of taken up the defense of the virtue signaler. So what is it in your view that virtue signaling does that benefits not just the virtue signaler, which I think people are quite happy to say that it benefits the virtue signaler, but how it benefits the rest of us as well?
Yeah, I guess I'm in the more descriptive camp. I think, well, also, virtue signals are annoying. So it's not a surprising that the hatred for them, at least the pejorative version, is nonpartisan, because there's nothing more annoying than being told how much you are failing morally by seem to do much about the moral. Uh, but yeah, I think I tend to take more of a descriptive view of signaling, virtue signaling. I think it can refer to the loud, obnoxious, boisterous person who doesn't really do much. Um, but I'm not as worried about that because I don't think those signals carry that far for the very reasons that we're talking about. They're not very costly to send, for one thing. I think even if people can articulate that, they get it at an intuitive level. Like anybody can repost something, anyone can write something outrageous, anyone can. I've written in other places that I think online outrage is a form of like moral junk food. It seems
Oh,
to satisfy these like urges that we have to be seen as moral, but it does it in a way that's not very healthy and not very sustainable. Um, so I think I would classify virtue signaling to like in terms of like either junk food, where we're talking about loud, boisterous, and relatively cost-free chest thumping, moral chest thumping. And I'm just not that worried about it because I don't think it works. But on the other hand, I do need virtue signaling in a much deeper, costlier sense.
mm,
Um, and this stems from the kind of creatures that we are. Like most of my work, um, I consider myself a philosopher of cooperation. So I'm always curious, like what makes people cooperate with each other. And so one of the problems that cooperators face is that we don't have full mind reading capacity. We have to use body language, signals, reputation, context, um, history, like biology. There's like a bunch of different things that we use to discern the intentions and plans and beliefs and preferences of others. Like how do you cooperate with someone? You have to know enough about them.
mm,
Um, so given that we are our one of our main ways of surviving is cooperating, you need some form of signaling to coordinate. And it's not even like a lot of people say that you need signaling to avoid like free riders and predators, and that's definitely part of what you need, like why you need that. But like even angels that only had partial access to each other's minds would still have to signal
mm,
because you wouldn't have full access to like what the other person's up to, what they're doing. You just wouldn't know. So that's the first piece of it is that signaling is a necessity.
mm,
Like for creatures like us, if we were tigers or like aliens that were very solitary and we didn't cooperate much or need any help, um, then I don't think we would need signaling. But we're the kinds of creatures that need to A, cooperate, and B, only have partial knowledge of each other. So that's the
mm,
first component. The second component that we need to signal in moral contexts. So we might need to signal in just like regular old context, like getting a job or marrying somebody. These are things where signaling comes in. They're very important. Um, but you also want to know whether someone's a good person or not. Are they a bad person? Are they a good person? Is it someone I can rely on? When the shit hits the fan, can I really trust that they are going to be there for me in a way that matters?
mm,
Like when I can't do anything about it, I can't punish them. I can't get even. I'm in a very, very dire straits. Is this person going to come through for me? And there, I think the costly, hard to fake virtue signaling is vital. Um, like Jimmy McGill, but genuine. Like the guy that really does come to your aid when you need him. The woman who's there for you, the friend who like keeps their promise when it's incredibly costly and inconvenient, but
mm,
you have no other option. Um, that's where the kind of virtue signaling I'm talking about is vital, and I think that has staying power, but you don't have to worry about it because it's costly and
mm,
it's the sort of thing that feels that you're very serious, that this is not like a quick hit to your dopamine that makes you feel good for like 5 minutes. This is something that, and there are certain people like this, where like their signals are costly and you can count on them. They'll be there for you when you need them. Um, so yeah, so I guess I'm in the non-pejorative camp, but I'm also not as worried about the costly, like the cheap, costless. Like anybody could have posted that because I suspect a lot of people will bicker and they'll spend a lot of time arguing about it, but at the end of the day, are pretty like they're onto it. They're not fooled by.
mm,
I mean, you don't believe me? Like, go to any post that you consider to be kind of like the crappy version. virtue signaling and read the comment section.
Hmm.
Like, people are pretty, like, maybe 20 years ago, people weren't as educated, but I suspect, like, um, these signals do not stand the test of time. I guess is maybe a better way to put it.
Yes, yeah. I suppose that one benefit that I've seen you mention that may apply to both these cases, I suppose, is in a kind of hypocrisy enforcing mechanism or anti-hypocrisy enforcing mechanism, I suppose. Like having people incentivized to verbally declare their own virtue or verbally signal their own virtue, even in low-cost ways, then allows other people, should they ever renege on that, to go, hang on a second, man. Remember when you posted that thing? You need to stick by this.
Yeah. Yeah, that was actually another piece that I was gonna get to, and I forgot because I ramble. Yeah, this is actually one thing that, like, kind of the thing that everyone misses about Donald Trump. He's a perfect example to illustrate this problem because it's a much bigger thing. But he's a great case, some people like his authenticity. Like, even if they don't agree with what he does, they think, "Well, he's a known quantity. He doesn't really hide the ball." And I think, yeah, there's some value to that. Um, the worry, though, is that he has no sense of shame, and he doesn't care if he's being a hypocrite. Like, calling him a hypocrite wouldn't, like, do much. He doesn't care. It would get no traction. You think, like, yeah, what are the great things about people making declarations and then caring whether or not they're consistent, is that you can, like, push people in positive ways even if they don't wanna be pushed. So I've got a paper that's already out, but a different version of it that I'm working on. It's called "The Other Invisible Hand," and
Mm-hmm.
it's sort of named Adam Smith's idea of the invisible hand in markets, where people's profit motives are used by markets to create abundance in a sense, right? So we have lots of, like, food and electronics and fuel and all these other cool things that, historically are quite strange. Like, most human beings have not lived the way we live at all or even remotely close to it. Um, and it's because we're really good in our societies, these current societies, at incentivizing people to make money. And one of the great ways to make money is to sell people crap that they want. Like, so, like, the equipment we're um, it was designed by really smart people, and it helps us communicate and have this cool conversation. But it wasn't in any way designed with that in mind, and it wasn't in any way motivated by that. It was motivated by the capacity to sell it to somebody else on the market. But it turns out that, um, like, making lofty moral claims about yourself, um, might be motivated by selfishness. It probably isn't in most cases, even if it's subconscious. But it's the sort of thing that if you care about your reputation is now a standard that people will hold you to. So if you
Mm.
declare that you're a super guy, that you're super patient, that you never eat meat, that you care about the suffering of homeless people, and all these other things, you try to make yourself look good, you might get a boost from that, and people might think more highly of you. But the other side of it is they're also going to be watching you to make sure that you abide by your standards, the standards that you
Mm.
preach, and the standards that got you a reputation boost. So if you look like a saint, you better act like one too, or your reputation is gonna take a huge hit.
This does remind me of something that I've done, because I am so aware of my own like infinite fallibility that I feel like I've put so much effort into disavowing my own moral character and being like, no, like I'm not a moral exemplar. Please don't think of me as a moral exemplar, or even like a particularly above morally neutral person. Like I try not to be morally bad, but I don't know. I read Peter Singer's Drowning Child argument and immediately was like, oh God, I'm awful in many ways. And so, this has been my own like anti-moral signal. But that's kind of made me realize that maybe maybe that's why. It's because the kind of terror of having to then rise to a standard that you're publicly signaling. I mean, that is actually quite considerable. I hadn't really considered that before.
Well, if you do that, right, if you go out to a bunch of people and declare how amazing you are, you may get a reputation boost from that. You might. The problem is that you can think of a reputation as like a subscription.
Mm.
If you don't make the payment, you'll lose it. Um, so yeah, there are gonna be situations that are going to arise, and you're gonna have to pay those reputation maintenance fees. You wanted that great reputation, you have to maintain it, and people are going to hold you to it. I mean, another part of this is that people are incredibly good at detecting hypocrisy, are really sensitive to it.
Really? Oh.
Um, you have a bunch of people, and not only that, but there's also some incentive to like point out hypocrites successfully, because when you do so, you get a bit of a boost there too. So you have a bunch of people who are modestly incentivized to check your actions against your claimed reputation
Mhm.
and see if they match. If they can find a mismatch, incredibly accuse you of hypocrisy, that can boost them too. So this is you're you're almost kept in check by your own hubris, your own greed, sort of a like you can set the mark really high and get that initial boost, but then you have to make the maintenance costs or like pay those moral maintenance costs to maintain that reputation.
I noticed this in the kind of online sphere with regarding the amount of judgment you dish out is often the amount of judgment that will end up coming your way. And as
Mm.
mired as I am in my favorite Christian idea, which is the idea of original sin, I this is something that I think has had. I think people ought to bear in mind. The extent to which you wield the hammer of judgment is the extent to which people will wield it back at you.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I think there's exceptions to this. Like you can think of plenty of cases where that's not the case, but there's almost this implicit norm. I almost want to say it's human. It's a very human norm that like doing something to someone gives them implicit permission to do it back to you.
Hmm.
So if you're going to judge them really harshly, hold them to a high standard, you know, point out every flaw, not give them any grace. Not everybody, but a lot of people are gonna do that back to you because you're sort of modeling the way this is like my theory of acceptable behavior. I'm, like, communicating into the world implicitly, but just going around and being like a virtue signaling jerk. What I'm doing is I'm implicitly communicating that this is an acceptable way to be. Um, there's exceptions. Some people are still gonna be nice to you regardless. Some people are still gonna be jerks. But I feel like you're right. Most people are going to they're gonna meet you at your level, and if that's where you're at, that's where they're gonna meet you. But there's positive sides to it too, which is that you can be held accountable.
Hmm.
Because the problem with people like Trump is that, they're pretty straightforward in some sense. Like, they don't really sugarcoat things, I guess is the way to put it. But one of the downsides is it's really hard to, like, reputationally shame them to act better than they otherwise would. So
Mm.
but yeah, so the idea with the other invisible hand is in politics, you've got people making lofty claims, they virtue signal a lot, they make it seem like they're better than they are, but through the power of reputations and credible charges of hypocrisy, you can actually force them to act better than they otherwise would as a result. Maybe this is waning in America, I don't know, I mean, it's changing, but for the longest time, and you can improve norms this way too,
Hmm.
right? Like, if I talk about a marginalized group or, like, I wanna improve the quality of education or, like, you know, I I'm trying to normalize a certain action that needs to be normalized. Like, there can be ways in which going around proclaiming a norm as a high status person for my own personal benefit might actually spread a norm that makes people better off.
Hmm.
So I start out with a selfish motive and end up with this like altruistic, um, beneficent result. Sort of like markets. They start out with like someone wanting profit and ended up benefiting people very indirectly and very unintentionally. So
Hmm.
it's a and there's a philosopher. I gotta give this guy credit. His name is John Elster. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's Elster. He's a Norwegian philosopher, but um, he's got this idea that publicity is like when you reason publicly and you try to appeal to the public, you have to appeal to more generic and benevolent like factors and arguments. Because if you just appeal to, like, the ways in which these things would benefit you personally, you're not gonna convince anyone to go along with you. You have to make broad appeals that will benefit you, and in so doing, this publicity is almost civilizing. Like, there's
Hmm.
like, you have to tone down the stuff yourself, and you have to make it more broad-based appeal. You really have to argue and show that people will benefit from this stuff, like, in a very broad way. Otherwise, it's not gonna have the kind of support that you need. Now, this is to be fair, this is, like, in democracy, so this doesn't work in, like, North Korea or something.
Hmm.
But insofar as you need voters to go along with you, um, publicity civilizes. So this is sort of a related idea.
It sounds really interesting. I think that it's sort of the flip side to you often defending concepts that are much maligned is that I think you've raised some really interesting critiques of concepts that are kind of instinctively celebrated by many people. And one of the most interesting is perhaps the idea of transparency. So, I mean, viewers of the channel will know that I'm a bit skeptical of transparency. I for various different reasons, but you've made a quite a sophisticated critique of the norm of transparency in kind of public life, and especially in the realm of politics.
Yeah, I mean, I should preface it by saying that I think there's a lot of value to transparency. You want some transparency in some places. So it's really like how much transparency and where that
Mm,
matters. But one of the things that I'll use with students to break the ice, and I mean, most of these are American students, but I think the idea generalizes. Um, the founders wrote the Constitution behind closed doors,
mm,
and they did it with armed guards. And one of the big reasons for that is actually a book uh, called Secret Government. That's the name of it, by Brian Kogelman. I'd highly recommend it. He goes into much more detail than I do. So basically, I like stole half these ideas from him. But in any case, so it's a great book on value of or the disvalue of transparency and the value of doing things and behind closed doors. Um, but one of the benefits, at least in a legislative process, um, is that for good or for ill, average voters seem to think of compromise as disloyal.
mm,
So you see this a lot right now, like Democrats working to Republicans, Republicans working to Democrats. It's seen as sort of like a betrayal of the tribe. How dare you side with those commie a-holes or those fascists or what have you. But the problem is that in a democratic process, it's really hard to get stuff done unless you compromise. Number
mm,
one. So you often need buy-in, at least from some members of the other side, especially if you're doing something big and transformative. But the other one is that often people's ideas suck, and you need pushback, to help you find a better the first version of your bills, like, maybe it's overpriced and it's got a weird enforcement mechanism, and it clashes with the Constitution. But by the time you get to version 4 and you've gotten all this feedback, some of it from the opposition, you end up with, like, this really cool bill with a great policy. So you
mm,
need sort of competitive intellectual pushback from the other side to really sort of work the kinks out of an idea. So those are two really good reasons why you need compromise. But if you're compromising in front of your constituents, your voters, activists, that can be a death knell for a political career.
mm,
So one of the so like outcome transparency is great. Who did the bill pass? What was the nature
mm,
of the bill, etc. Procedural transparency, not so much, because then you're gonna get, like, Senator so and so sold us out, so we're gonna primary him next election. Well, that can be, and that can incentivize legislators to just not pass hard legislation anymore. I mean, we're kinda seeing this right now in the United States Congress, where things just don't get done because everybody's worried about being primaried by, the types of people that tend to show up in primaries, which it tends not to be your median voter. It tends to be, I mean, for lack of a better term, wackos. I mean, these are folks they're extreme, and they have nothing better to do. And both parties have this problem. So that's one area where, like, transparency is quite bad, and it's a democratic setting where you might think, no, you want to watch your legislators making legislation. But the problem is that, like, no, the types of people that would be watching them and taking notes are, like, the wrong people that you want paying attention to that process. Not median voters. They are not. They're happy to game the system as best they can. Um, but there's another thing too, which is and I have a paper coming out. It's called "Big Brother is Corrupting You,"
mm,
and I argue that, like, 1984, the novel by George Orwell, is a great example of where transparency becomes a kind of surveillance, and it's a kind of surveillance that corrupts your soul. It forces you to pay deference to Big Brother, to the party, to the power that be, to find justifications for it, to defend it, to not look like you're sympathetic to anything anti Big Brother. And you're forced into either, on the one hand, maintaining two personas, So if you're Winston Smith, the protagonist in 1984, for the longest time, he was forced to, on the one hand, publicly affirm Big Brother, but on the other hand, internally, keep a diary and try and keep a private life where he resisted Big Brother. And we know how that ends, right? The last line of the book is he loved Big Brother. He's tortured, he's brainwashed. So eventually, what ends up happening is you're forced to, like, you know, do this so often that you forget the difference between the public persona and the private persona. I think there's a Nathaniel Hawthorne quote that I use in the paper, which is a man can't wear one face to the crowd, one face to himself without forgetting which is which. I'm paraphrasing, but that's sort of the idea. So you either end up with this, like, very inauthentic life, or you internalize the stuff that is, like, oppressive or deceptive or, just bad for society. Um, it does a number on your moral reliability, right? If I'm constantly thinking, how do I change how do I change how I explain my moral judgments? How do I do it in a way that's appeals to people? That doesn't always track the truth. That doesn't always track moral character. So transparency can put us in a position where we're forced to deceive others. We are forced to carry a party line. We are forced to not make a compromise that would be beneficial for everybody because of how bad it would look, for our careers or constituents. Um, so there's another area where you might think knowing more is better, where actually knowing more is bad, and you actually want to know less. But this is at the margin. So people, they're worried about me saying, like, I think I've been portrayed as, like, anti-transparency or something, and I'm really just anti much transparency. Like, I think some transparency is good. Like, there's plenty of cases where you wouldn't want the government to be behind closed doors either. You want some form of transparency. So there's a balance to be struck between knowing too much and knowing too little. But I would recommend Kogelman's book, really good book. It's called Secret Government, and he really dives into like historical examples, political science, um, like lots of like theory. He gets into like some economics. But yeah, he's at Purdue. But I'd recommend it. It's a really good book.
Oh, I'll have to check it out. I mean, I think a lot about my generation and in the context of transparency and surveillance, largely just in the context of like publicity and having people's lives on social media and like specifically their private lives, right? One of my friends pointed out to me the other day, and it was such a good observation. I wish I thought of it, but I didn't. So, thanks to him, but also he's a bastard for stealing from me the opportunity to come up with this myself. Is he pointed out that loads of the insults that Gen Z uses are insults that refer to a third party. So things like his example was cringe. He was talking about, what when you call something cringe, what are you doing? You're like, you're not insulting it. You're referencing the imaginary opinion of a third eye that's seeing the whole situation. And I was like, that's really interesting. I'm just kind of spitballing here, but I wonder whether that's partly a result of people's lives being significantly more transparent than they used to be. And I don't know, maybe that's an example of how people watching this might be able to think about maybe limiting the role of transparency in their own life as well.
Yeah, no, that's a really good example. Yeah, and part of the reason I say that is because, one of the objections that I'll often get, and I don't think it's a very good one, but I get it a lot, is, what about when no one's watching? Like, people will donate money, they'll do all kinds of things when they'll do these benevolent things that are costly to them, but no one's watching. So if it's about reputation, why are they doing that? And there's this thing in the moral psychology, it's called the social heuristic hypothesis. And it basically says, you basically just default to, like, you're being observed unless you have really good evidence to think that you're not. Um, like, we've all done this before. Like, you're in you're alone and you're, like, singing the catchy tune in your head that you can't get rid of, and then you're like, "What if someone was watching me?" And you, like, kinda stop and, like, look around, and then, like, keep doing it. I mean, it's just me, I don't know. Maybe this is just confession, I have no idea. Um, but, like, there's kind of that, like, there could always be someone watching, and even calculating whether or not to think about someone watching you is itself a calculation. So you might just be like, "It's just better to pretend like I'm being watched most of the time." And you think, "Well, wait a minute, like, that seemingly would apply to, like, Gen Zers who are very socially like, they're very, online. Like, they have a big social media presence. They must have that internalized all the more. Like, why do they do the things that they do even when no one's watching? Because they've internalized that social heuristic so deeply, they, like, rely on it without even thinking. So that's actually a really great example of, like, why do stuff when no one's watching? Because you've been so conditioned to think that someone is always watching. And also add to that, like, this is also a generation that's coming up where there's, like, more cameras per square foot than, like, ever because,
Mm,
surveillance equipment is becoming cheaper and cheaper. Storage is becoming cheaper and cheaper, and then as AI gets cheaper, it can, parse through the data quicker.
mm,
Um, there's gonna be a lot more surveillance. So, this heuristic is only going to become further embedded, I suspect. I mean, presumably, at some point, there will be, like, pushback, like,
mm,
mechanisms for confounding these, surveillance devices, 'cause this is sort of like an arms race that we're
mm,
in the middle of. Um, like, putting a rock in your shoe so an AI can't detect you by your gait or something, right? Like, stuff like that.
mm,
Um, but yeah, they're also growing up, like, surrounded by cameras and this, like, ubiquity of social media. So, like, when people are like, "Well, why do you do it when no one's watching?" Because 'Cause you've so internalized that
mm,
someone not only is watching, but might be, even if, like, you
mm.
can't discern like, there's no one obviously around, but you never know if there's a camera watching or something.
Also, I suppose one of the people watching me is me as well. Like, as in, I know that self-signaling is part of the mix as well. Like, why does one stick by one's own values when no one's watching? Well, part of that is because like I can't not watch, and I'll feel awful.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, unless you're a psychopath or something, yeah. I think most people don't wanna be an asshole, not really.
Mm,
Like, even I watch a lot of, like I'm rewatching right now, Homicide: Life on the Streets, which is, like, this '90s show, sort of a precursor to, like, Law& and Order and The Wire. Um, but yeah, like, every criminal it's a goofy show. The scripts are goofy. My wife's a prosecutor, so she'll be like, "That's not a thing." Like, sometimes when they're, like, talking about something, like but one of the things I've noticed is, like, even the worst criminals, like, the idea that you would kill your grandma for no reason, or you'd run over a dog, or, like,
mm,
harm a child, like, there's just like, even these hardened criminals have certain lines that they don't wanna cross for their own sense of self, and I just don't think most people wanna be an asshole. I mean, maybe Francis Urquhart from the original House of Cards, which I'd highly recommend watching, yeah. Um, some, like, bona fide psychopath who does not care. Oh, they only care insofar as it's instrumental to them achieving their goals. But I think, like, 99% of people, like, you don't wanna look in the mirror and be like, "God, you're a piece of shit." Like you I don't so we'll come up with excuses, we'll come up with rationalizations, we'll come up with, "I had to do it because of this reason, they forced me to do it for that reason." Self-deception, lies, and all kinds of other things. And I mean, one of them is one of the reasons is this sort of, reinforces your moral identity, which helps with reputational stuff. So it's definitely part of it. But part of it is just being a coherent moral agent that seems to be consistent and have integrity. Um, but yeah, we signal as it turns out, we signal to ourselves all the time. And you can look back and be like, "Oh yeah, I am the kind of guy that does that. I am the kind of guy that shows up when he's supposed to. I am the kind of guy that goes to the gym even when he doesn't feel like it. I am the kind of guy that keeps his promises. I'm
mm,
that person." And I suspect a lot of people have done that. You've been like, you're in a moment of uncertainty. Maybe you're trying a new budget. Maybe you're trying a new diet. Maybe you're trying to get back to the gym, and you're, like, thinking on past things that you've done as a way to, like, sort of buck up your will and reaffirm your identity as the kind of person that does that stuff. You're like, "Oh, no, I do go to the gym. Remember this? You did this, and then you did that, and you did this other thing, and, like, you can do this."
mm.
But maybe that's confession again, I don't know.
No, no, I think so. I think I certainly, use my identity as a lever sometimes. Like when I'm feeling like like we've just had a heat wave in the UK, and so like it's. I mean, you're in Arizona, so it's like rookie temperatures compared to what I imagine you're used to. But it's very, very hot for everyone in the UK because it rains approximately 300 days of the year here, and it's been sort of incredibly warm. And as a result, I've had to draw on my identity in order to motivate me a lot, because it's hot and all I want to do is like, I don't know, have cold showers all day and not do anything. But yeah, no, I can certainly relate to having to draw on the motivation of maintaining that identity to myself. On the point of transparency, one of the really interesting things you've argued is that public democracy, as it's currently set up, encourages people to bullshit in the technical sense. And I think that's a very interesting position, because I think it ties in a little bit closely to the point about keeping transparency in balance in public life as well.
Mm. Yeah, it's weird how that works. Yeah, so the technical sense of bullshit, I don't know if your listeners and viewers are familiar, but this goes back to an essay written by Harry Frankfurt. I think it goes back to the 80s, if I'm not mistaken. It was like repopularized in the early 2000s. But there's a little booklet on like Amazon called On Bullshit. It's like one of those like plane flight reads, pretty quick. But basically the bullshitter is someone who is insensitive to the truth, meaning they're not interested in telling the truth. They're also not interested in lying. They're interested in persuasion. And insofar as truth or lies facilitate persuasion, that's all they care about. So that's sort of the I actually have another paper too on ChatGPT is a bullshitter because people, I don't know, ChatGPT is bullshit because people are bullshitters. But yeah, because democracy, especially insofar as it's a exposure process, so you're exposed to voters, you're observed, you're watched, people see what you vote for, what you spend your money on, where you get your contributions. So it's a spectator sport, and spectator sports require plausible sounding rationalizations for actions. You don't want to be the guy caught with your pants down without a good explanation. I mean, this is like you get busted by your wife, and you're supposed to be on a diet, and it's like 3:00 in the morning, and you're like sneaking cookies in the kitchen or something, and you're like, "It's for the dog," or like. Oh, yeah, it's called Democracy Incentivizes Bullshit is the name of the paper you're referring to. But yeah, basically the argument is that there's a lot of ways in which democracy, um, depending on the type, is going to encourage people to aim at plausibility rather than truth. They're gonna wanna sound like what they're doing is good, is morally beneficial, is helpful to society, is upright, honest, or feigning ignorance. They didn't know. Wasn't me, somebody else. They just looked like me. But yeah, I think of like when I make the contrast, I like to use American presidents because everybody knows about them. But I sort of think of Bill Clinton as the liar, and Donald Trump as the bullshitter. Sort of the cases where Donald Trump will say anything. Donald Trump would speak nothing but the truth if it got him what he wanted. He doesn't care. It's very obvious he doesn't care. Whereas, like in Bill Clinton's case, especially during like the Monica Lewinsky scandal, avoiding certain truths was paramount for Mr. Clinton, and it was very obvious in the way he'd answer questions and do interviews. And stuff. So, but you can see why. I mean, can you imagine a world where politicians don't bullshit? Like they're honest. They're like it'd be a very very different world. Like like the famous "I'm resigning to spend more time with my family," right? Which is like never true. Like I'm resigning because I have a porn addiction and I'm in debt and my wife is leaving me and I don't have the time to run my campaign. I'm resigning because I'm being brought up on charges. And like there's all kinds of things that like if you were totally it would just be a very different world, right? So yeah, democracy lends itself to bullshit for the simple reason that like people are evaluating you. So you have to offer them reasons that sound good. And often reasons that sound good and reasons that are true are very different things. Those things come apart quite a bit. So yeah, democracy, it shouldn't come to a shock, but democracy incentivizes bullshit. That's what happens.
Yes, there's a really famous bit in the British TV program Yes Minister, which I was thinking about regarding like prudential
Right,
benefits
yeah.
of ignorance, where some big cock up happens, and it has to be shown on the official records that something was sent to the prime minister's office, but the prime minister can't know, because then he would be culpable for his lack of action, given that he'd know this particular thing. So they draft a memo, they use very unclear language, they send it when the prime minister's away on holiday, so nobody will quite know who received it. And it kind of reminded me your paper reminded me of this scene, because it's like such a classic example of, we're going to do our best to construct the perfect rational post hoc story that we can, that will make it so that nobody is ever seen to have individually done a misstep, but collectively it turns into a worse situation for the public at large.
If you think about it, another way to think about this is like democracies are often basically popularity contests. Voters aren't very well informed, and it goes to that thing where it makes rational sense on an individual level why voters wouldn't be informed. Um, in large democracies, an individual vote doesn't do much to sway the outcome one way or the other. It may in a very, very offhanded place, very unlikely. Um, so it isn't really rational to be super informed. Um, so you're in a popularity contest where first appearances do a lot, and I'm not trying to pick on voters. It often sounds like I am when I talk this way, but people are busy. I get it. The reason I get to think about this stuff is I'm paid to.
Mm.
I wouldn't be thinking about this stuff if I had, like, a real job. Um, and then you throw kids in the mix, bills, religious services, family obligations. People are busy. Um, so there's definitely opportunity cost to it. So people in politics are they're very practiced in first pass impressions. How do things look initially? Hoping that people don't have the incentive to follow up, and most people don't. Um, so But yeah, yes, prime minister is a yes minister and yes prime minister are like a gold mine of these
Ah,
examples where you're like,
they're such fantastic
the
shows.
yeah, they really are. They're really good. And they hold up really well. Really
I
well.
mean, on this point about political rationality and irrationality, because one of the, again, an interesting thing that you've kind of mounted a defense for are some of the benefits of political irrationality. And again, we're often talking about how to make politics more rational and more reasonable. But it's nice to hear the other side. I mean, what are the kind of benefits of political irrationality in this sense?
Well, it ties into what we were talking about, and it ties into the paper I was describing, the other invisible hand. But it's the idea that things like virtue signaling and rationalization in politics, um, they communicate norms. People rarely brag about, like, "I murdered a hooker and left her in my trunk for a month." Like, it's not probably a good talking point. It's probably not gonna get you elected. I mean, there may be some weird districts where that might be a plus, but in most places, no, it's not gonna actually help you very much. But, um, doing a concert for a children's hospital might look really good, or, giving, a bunch of money to a great cause, um, passing laws that look like they do lots of good things and, like, fighting for
Mm,
them. Um, so these things look initially like, "Oh, they're gonna give me this boost, they're gonna make me look good." Um, but they sort of force you to abide by a standard,
mm,
that you picked because it's good, but then ended up being better because you were sort of forced to go along with it. So, um, same thing with rationalizations. Rationalizations are like, sort of passive justifications that we give to make ourselves look better than we otherwise would. But the problem is that these can set up precedents that people will then, hold us to. They'll hold us accountable. Um, so yeah, I mean, that's why it's sort of the other invisible hand in the sense that politicians don't say lofty things about themselves and what they've supported in past, etc., to improve norms or improve laws or to make it easier and less costly to be a moral person, but that's often the result.
mm.
I mean, imagine slavery. You're you're in the middle of slave days. It's very normal to be slavery. It's very normal to own slaves. But it's beginning to wane, and you think, if I could position myself as anti-slavery, as this becomes a more popular thing over the next 20 years, I can use some of my heft, my popularity as a high status individual, make myself look better in the process. But in doing so, you actually add momentum to the movement to abolish slavery. So it starts out as this like selfish act where, just wanting to look good to people. Maybe your local constituents are Quakers or something, right? But the end result being putting pressure on better norms and making it easier and cheaper for people to do what's right. Like I think a lot of people have some very good idea about what is morally permissible and acceptable. Not for everything, but like a lot of things where they don't act. But part of the reason they don't act is because it's costlier to act than they think is rational, so they just don't act on it. But if you can reduce the cost of, say, not owning slaves, then that can get you some progress.
So I mean, in some ways, I think that the interesting consequence of this argument is kind of breaking down this division that we often have between kind of good selflessly motivated actions and bad selfishly motivated actions. And your point being that actually, quite fortunately, that the way that our social signaling structures seem to be set up allows us to convert a lot of selfish, egoistic, or egoistic aims, which may or may not be present, but surely some people do act egoistically, and eventually convert them into genuine moral progress. It reminds me of this. There's this bit in Machiavelli where he effectively says it's really important to appear just to your people. And then like the next 5 pages are basically him saying, in order to appear just, you kind of just have to be just, because people notice if you're not. And it's one of those really interesting, people think of Machiavelli as like this kind of really egoistic schemer. And quite a lot of his arguments are structured like that. They're saying it's really important to look like you're good at this. So you've got to be good at this. And the rest will just be a very, very long explanation of how being good at something will translate into looking good at it as well. And that will be in your best interest to do. So it's amazing a kind of how, as I say, this division between egoism on the one hand and selflessness on the other can kind of get blurred, at least in terms of its effects. Which is quite handy, like it's good that it's very fortunate that is the case.
Yeah, and there's actually 2 thoughts. So when I talk a lot about signaling, people will think something like, "Oh, when you say signal, you mean appear as if you have this quality or this property," kind of like Jimmy McGill pretending to like he's benevolent when he's really not. And I just think, no, that's really kind of goofy. I mean, there's weird cases where that's true, but most of the time, the best way to signal a property that you have a property is just to have it. Like, to actually be genuine, to actually be sincere. Um, you can fake it, but it's not gonna be very stable. It's not gonna be nearly as stable as just actually being sincere. And it's interesting how it really ties into philosophy. So people will often say, like, it's common to say things like, "Philosophy begins in wonder," and I think that's probably true. But I also think philosophy begins in noticing there's a distinction between appearance and reality. This is really like, you get this a lot in Plato, right? The difference between how things appear and how they really are. And ironically, this applies to, like, virtue signaling and just regular signaling too, because sometimes the best way to appear like something is just to be the thing. It's the most stable, and the reason it's going to stably look like that thing is because it is, right? Um, so but yeah, it's interesting that Machiavelli like, it's too bad I didn't have you around when I was writing that paper. That quote would have been really great. Um, like, yeah, this is what you find in the evolutionary biology and economic signaling literature, which is like in most there's exceptions, there's like screwy cases where this isn't true, but overwhelmingly the best way to signal properties is to have it rather than to
Mm.
pretend to have it or to fake it or um so like the most stable signaling systems tend to be the ones that are the most reliable, the most the ones with I think it's in the literature it's called high fidelity signals.
Mm.
They're very faithful signals, and those tend to be the most stable.
Mm.
We have a saying in our society, "Fake it to make it."
Mm.
So I think that's kinda like a in faking it, you're almost like cultivating it, and then over time becoming it. Right?
Yes, yeah, no, I can kind of see that. Well, I suppose one thing is, if let's use the exercise as kind of an example. Just it's a very like easy toy example. Like if you imitate somebody who goes for a run every day, you will kind of ipso facto become a person who goes for a run every day. Like it's just sort of, it just happens that's kind of is imitation there becomes non-imitation. It becomes just a truth about you. I'm really interested in talking about the benefits of this, like the benefits of things like parasites, because as I said, I know this is kind of earliest stages, but it sounds so fascinating. So what's your line of inquiry here? What are you thinking?
Well, it's related to it goes back to Lewis Carroll and the Red Queen problem. So through the looking glass, Alice I think it's through the looking glass. Alice is asking, how to stay in place. I forget the context in the Red Queen, the nation of the Red Queen or the country of the Red Queen. And people say something like, "Well, you have to run in place to stay in the same spot, or you have to keep running because the ground underneath you is constantly shifting." Um, and this is supposed to be a metaphor for like our immune systems. So our immune systems are really adaptive, and one of the reasons they're adaptive is because parasites in our environment have quick generations, so they can evolve and adapt very quickly. Um, and this is one of the major theories for why sex exists. So two people love each other very, very much, and they have sex, and they sometimes produce offspring. One of the major theories of that, going all the way back to the evolution of sex, is that it's a way to combat parasites. Um, it's not probably the only way, but it's one of the, and there's some pretty good experimental evidence for this too. I don't really want to go into it because it's the whole thing, um, but you think, okay, cool. So parasites give us sex, is what I'm hearing. Cool. Sort of as a means to counteract the parasites. Because if you could reproduce asexually, it seems way more efficient, and you get all of your genes. Like if I reproduce asexually, I just sort of clone myself, and I get more and more copies of myself. And from like in terms of passing on my genes, that seems like a way more efficient than having sex and then producing a child that's like half my genetic material. So you might think from an evolutionary point of view, it's sort of weird that sex evolved at all. But no, it turns out it looks like it's one of the things that battles parasites. Well, the weird thing is when you add sex to creatures like us, meaning we pair bond, we have very expensive offspring, sort of like elephants and orangutans. They have long gestation periods, long childhoods. We need grandparents and like elders and townspeople, and like because we learn a lot socially as humans. That's one of the things we do. It turns out you need something else for creatures like us, something that we value a lot. I know I personally do. It's something the Beatles sang about: love. Love will keep us together. Love is all we need. Um, Love is a really, really important thing, and it's like very, very central to what it is to be human. And you really need love to sort of bind people together long enough to raise children. You need romantic love. You need familial love. Hell, you even need friendship love, right? Takes a village to raise a child. You need neighbors and people in your church, maybe at your school. What sounds like a very long-winded and very indirect way of saying that parasites gave us love.
Mm.
So if you think like something that we independently value, like it's not like we're like, well, we only love because of these damn parasites, and if it wasn't those little buggers, there would be no value to love. No, we think no, there's this independent value,
Mm.
this really cool thing to have love in your life, to be loved, to love others. And yet, like, it's weird to think, no, it's those little bugs, those little fucking parasites that, pardon my French, that grow in you, or that can take over your body, or that can like worm their way into your intestines, or whatever it is. Like, no, those little buggers are a big part of why we have this beautiful thing called love.
Mm. That's really interesting.
Yeah. That'd be one benefit. I think there's lots of others, but that's sort of like my go-to toy. Like we think love is independently valuable, and we also have really good reason to think we wouldn't have it, at least like for creatures like us, theistic love and other types of like sort of a different issue.
Huh.
But at least for creatures like us, it looks like a big reason why is parasites.
That's really interesting. And are there similar cases for things like freeloaders and psychopaths, the kind of other quintessential, or the kind of, what we would call like social parasites, I suppose, as opposed to biological parasites? Is it that you found that they also give rise to similar independently valued things that were kind of developed as a response?
Yeah, but I don't really want to give away too much. And I'm
Oh, no,
also
that's
not
absolutely fine.
like those are areas where, and part of it is those are areas where, like the love example is sort of what sucked me in, and those are a
Mm,
little more tentative. So I'm not sure. Yeah, there's a couple things I haven't cashed out yet, but that would be sort of the recipe where it's like, you have predators or parasites or free riders, um, and they produce this response that then gives us this independently valuable thing that
mm,
we likely wouldn't have without them. That's sort of the formula I'm using.
mm.
But yeah, things that like we think they're valuable, but it wouldn't occur to you that like they're valuable and they result from this like other thing that you think is awful and you should get rid of. And there are bad things about it, sure, but there's also this cool thing that you hadn't considered.
Yes, this sort of
So
idea of
that's
like,
sort of where I'm at.
yeah, like you wouldn't be able to wish the independently valuable thing without also essentially wishing the negative thing that managed to give rise to it.
Yeah, I mean, at least causally, I don't know about counterfactually. Like, you might imagine God creates a world potentially, where love is just a thing independently of parasites. So
Mm.
I don't think it's, like, metaphysically connected,
Yes,
but
yeah.
there's definitely, like, a contingent causal like, history that without that contingent causal history, just wouldn't be creatures like us, and there wouldn't be creatures like us capable of love, which maybe we're deluded, maybe it's not independently valuable, but I don't know. I'm pretty sure it is.
At the very least,
So
seems like it seems like it is, even if it's not stance independently valuable, it very much seems like it is stance dependently valuable, separate from its impact on parasites. Like I only just learnt that chances are love only evolved because of a kind of causal chain that began with our need to combat parasites. And if you were to tell me now that, oh, the parasites are gone, I wouldn't be like, oh, great, I get to stop loving now. That would seem very, very strange. At the very least, it's kind of outgrown its initial cause in terms of what we love about it, anyway.
yeah, I mean, another one is signaling, but, like, art would be another
Mm,
one where, um, it starts out as, like, it's a romantic signal, it's a signal of cooperators. It does a lot of signaling work, um, but we just think, "No, there's something independently beautiful and awesome about." I mean, whether it's music or sculptures or visual arts or whatever it is, like, there's just something independently like, I don't think life would be worth living without music, for example, right?
mm.
And you're like, "Well, no, we like, the only reason we have music is because like, that helps us signal things like intelligence and gets us cooperators, helps us fight parasites and free riders." And you're like, "Okay, cool. That may be true. That's fine. I'm fine with that." But there also seems to be this other thing. It's, like, ethereal. It, like, makes life bearable. It can make tasks that are otherwise onerous, like going to the gym, like, who wants to do that? It's not nearly as bad if you can listen to some music, some really cool tunes while you're doing it. So it just seems to be something independently valuable about art, and yet art also seems to be a product of, like, free riders and mooches and people that look or creatures, entities that look like they're just purely negative and extractive. And then it turns out, no, we respond to that, and in that responding equilibrium, these independently valuable things will emerge. It's really cool.
It's a lovely counterpoint to what I think a lot of people's reactions are when they hear about kind of naturalistic explanations or causal descriptions for how certain things that we value very highly came about. As in a lot of people, for example, will hear a neurological description of the emotion of love and think, oh, love is just chemicals then. And I love the kind of reverse of the order of enchantment here. You're kind of doing the opposite thing. You're saying, no, like really, the correct thing you should say is not, oh, well, I guess love just evolved for the sake of combating parasites. Really, you can just as legitimately go, wow, I should really appreciate parasites more. Conceptually at the very least.
Yeah, or maybe the world there are how do I put this? Maybe something along the lines of, there are benefits and blessings in weird places. Um, like, sometimes the unlikeliest of places, you know?
Mm,
I mean, a great example of this was, not if I'm getting this right, but it was during, I think it was when Mao Zedong was in charge of the CCP in China, where they had this huge campaign to get rid of, I forget the name of the bird. The birds that would basically like steal seeds and like destroy their crops. So it was like this huge campaign to kill these things off. I think they were like a form of robin, but I could be wrong about that. But anyway, these birds were they were considered a nuisance. They just would wreak havoc on crops. So they eliminated most of the species pretty successfully. And their crop yield was even worse the next year. And it turned out the birds, now they ate the crops, but they also ate bugs. I think it was like locusts or something. That turned out to be like when they were left to their own devices, the bugs were even worse for the crops because that's all they ate. So it turned out getting rid of the thing they thought was bad was actually worse. And I see this a lot where people will reason like X is bad, therefore I should get rid of X and replace it with Y. But they never ask the question, is Y worse than X?
Mm.
Like, I don't like a policy, I don't like a procedure. I think there's something like I buy a business and I just think, "You guys are doing this wrong. There's way better ways of doing this." And then come to find out all the other ways of doing it are actually worse than what they're doing, which is why they're doing it that way. Um, the economist Michael Munger at Duke calls this the pretty pig problem. So it's like a parable where, like, you go to, like, a state fair in the South, and they bring out the pigs, and they're judging to see which pig is the prettiest pig to get the blue ribbon, and you just go to the first pig, and you're like, "That pig's ugly." So you just give the ribbon to the second pig without investigating, is the second pig even uglier? Because
Mm.
if it is, uh, people do this a lot in politics too. They're like, "Well, it's a market failure, therefore the government should solve it," without asking, "Will the government fail even worse?" But we do this a lot. Parasites are bad, so we should get rid of parasites, or, and you're like, "Well, I don't know." There are these, like, hidden benefits and blessings in places that, you know, you haven't taken time to really think about, but they're there.
Mm.
So,
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. Well, I certainly look forward to reading it because that's the book that you're pitching after this book.
well, um, I just sent off the book, the Better Not to Know book, a couple days ago. So I'm basically waiting on proofs and cover art, and then it
Mm.
should be, like, available to purchase. And I'm also getting I'm in the process of collecting blurbs. Um, but yeah, so that would be like I'll probably wait a year because 'cause I'm kinda sick of books for the moment. Um, I've got, like, this, like, big stack of, like, papers that I had to read for the book, and it was like writing, like, a second dissertation.
Mm.
So probably, like, 6 months to a year, but I also felt like with the AI, I gotta, like, get all my writing out now, and because what like, the philosophy androids will take over, and then I won't have a job. So, like, I gotta get everything out, but while I still can.
I mean, so speaking of, because you're a professor at the moment, and you've been very active
Yes.
uh in sort of trying to make sure that or putting forward arguments about AI not killing higher ed and not killing philosophy, which is lovely to see because there's so much kind of pessimism that I see about there. I mean, how have you found navigating that as a professor and as a philosopher?
Well, there's a couple of ideas. I mean, a couple of thoughts. One of them is, if if you're a philosopher or a professor and you care about teaching people, letting other people define the AI debate, and, like, that's probably not the best. Like, you should be leading another way of doing things or looking at at AI, its relationship. Um, but the other one is it's therapy. Like, I write these things so I don't go crazy.
Hmm.
I'll be like, "Okay, but, like, well, you're all these pessimists," and they'll, like, echo in my head, and I love teaching. I love what I do, and it would suck to have to go up to a computer. It just would.
Mm.
I'm not sure that a computer will voice me, to be fair, but suppose it could, like, it would suck. So I just think, like, "Okay, what is the best case that I could make for the other side?"
Mm.
Like, for my own san but I watched, oh, what's the movie? It's the Robin Williams movie, um, I wanna it okay, I'm blanking on he's like a teacher, it's super popular.
Oh, the History Boys? No, Dead Poet Society. I always get the two confused.
Yeah, I was gonna say Pulp Fiction and realized, like, no, that's a Quentin Tarantino movie, that's not what I'm talking about at all. But yeah, the Dead Poets Society. I guess it made a huge impression on me when I was younger that like teaching isn't really about conveying content. It's about inspiring people to join a community of learners and questioners. It's really about inspiration and showing the way more than content delivery, which I think is what AI is good at. Um, but just thinking like and using this AI debate to force me to be a better teacher is another way that I'm looking at it. Like if AI is content delivery and it can replace me, I'm a pretty shitty teacher. So how can I be a better teacher? And how can I really focus on the stuff that humans do well and then let the AI take the rest? Because if an AI can do it really well, like if an AI can replace you as a teacher, you're probably not a very good teacher. Like I say,
Mm.
but you're probably not. But really instilling the itch in students to get them to pursue things, that is teaching, in my estimation. But yeah,
Mm.
so I thought, someone got to take charge, and what a great opportunity to be a better teacher, right? Using like rising to the challenge rather than letting fear and stick. And also, go back and read predictions about what the internet was going to do like 20, 30 years ago. People were so wrong about so many things that I just think tech predictions don't work. You may get lucky here and there. You might get lucky like broadly AI is going to change a lot, sure. But when you get too specific, it just it just doesn't work. Like
Mm.
systems are too complex to predict. It's better to like stick to the basics. Be a better teacher. Try and shape the AI stuff where you can. And also, um, where can AI how can AI make us better professors and philosophers is another question. Like that should be a thing we should be thinking about a lot. How can we use it to do our work better? So I've actually got a paper on that. It's called Synthetic Socrates and the Philosophers of the Future.
Mm.
I'm just like, it could be philosophy is better done by a robot in the future, in which case it would make more sense to focus on building the robot than doing the philosophy. But I don't think we're there yet, thankfully.
I mean, one thing that you bring up is that is this concept of local knowledge, and it's something that I think a lot about from my own time at university, and also kind of my reading now is that I feel like a lot of what a human brings to the table is as much about what they don't know as what they do know. Like it's just having happened to have read this particular paper that kind of, that you got from a kind of suggestion on the right side of your laptop when you were looking at another paper on Phil papers and you thought, God, that's really interesting. I'm going to have a look at that. You kind of stumble across entirely by chance. It's got like 2 citations, but it's really, really good. And I don't know, it'd be interesting to hear a little bit about that. I know we're coming up to the end of our time, but this idea of local knowledge being something that large language models, as they currently exist, kind of fail to tap into.
Well, I mean, large language models have access to the data that they're trained on, which is the kind of data that is widely available and is fed into them. Local knowledge is the kind of knowledge, it's like time and place knowledge. One way I like to illustrate this is like you and your buddies have an inside joke. You try
Hmm.
to explain it to someone else and don't really get it. And then you're like, oh, you had to be there. That's local knowledge. That's exactly what that
Hmm.
is. That's the kind of knowledge where you have to be there to get it. It's the same kind of knowledge that like economic committees and legislative bodies lack too. So like how well is a particular product gonna sell in a neighborhood? I don't know. How well is it gonna sell in a household? Like, is Bob down the street gonna buy, chili peppers? Probably not. Or he will. Maybe he loves them. How much and you want an example of local knowledge that's, very local? Just think about the last time you walked into a store or you went online and you were gonna buy something, but you weren't quite sure, A, what it was. Like, you knew you wanted new shoes, but, like, the exact color, the exact brand, eh. And also your price point. Like, what is your price ceiling? How much are you willing to spend? Um, are you gonna buy 2 if they're on sale? Ooh. So there's lots of things you don't even know about yourself that you only learn once you're pressured or put in a situation where you have to sort of generate that knowledge about yourself. That's local knowledge. It's the sort of knowledge that just it's not broadly accessible, and it's not easy to obtain, and it's often generated and located locally, close to the source. Um, you might call it, I don't even know what. You might like, instead of like, international knowledge, it's local knowledge. It's
Mm,
like a local business, right?
mm,
It's the kind of thing, it's the sort of knowledge that, like, um, insiders have. Like, when you travel and you wanna ask the locals, like, "What's a good place to get a cup of coffee?" Or, like, "Where's a great place for a piece of cheesecake?" It's the sort of knowledge that you just don't find on Reddit or, Google reviews or that kind of thing. It's,
mm,
like, for example, my Parasite book, like, that you can ask, like, "What is Professor Jimmy working on right now?" And if it hasn't been trained on that parasite idea, it's not gonna
mm,
know,
mm,
right? Um, but yeah, that's sort of the idea of local knowledge, and it's everywhere. Local knowledge is everywhere.
mm.
And it's often, like, a key to knowing something, uh, getting a deal, passing a policy, getting someone to cooperate, like, it can be keys for doing a lot of different things, and, like, AI just doesn't have it. And neither do so for the same reason that, like, AI doesn't have the local knowledge is the same reason that, like, communism fails. They don't have the local knowledge.
And this is the kind of I was thinking back to my own time at university and kind of how much the particularly interesting and valuable things that we learnt were shaped by really idiosyncratic interests of the professors. Like a fact and an idea that I've had drilled into my head since I was in my second year at university was that when Frege received Wittgenstein's copy of the Tractatus, and the very first line was, "The world is all that is the case," or I can't remember the exact wording. Frege immediately sent a letter back asking if this was a definition or an empirical claim. And that's like that's not going to be
Yeah.
on like a Wikipedia page or a Reddit page. That's because my professor of the history of analytic philosophy just loved this as an anecdote and told it about 4 times over the course of my time at uni. So like, yeah, I don't know. It's something that I thought was really interesting, partly because in hindsight, yeah, this really is true. There is all sorts of some of the most interesting and valuable things that we end up learning are at the end of very, very idiosyncratic chains. Like I said, I used the example of the right-hand side of suggested articles on Phil papers, because that's how I found that Nguyen article on echo chambers that I was talking about earlier. It's one of the most interesting papers I've read, like this year. And again, stumbled across it basically by chance. So yeah, no, there's a kind of it's interesting. I found that learning about or learning the concept of local knowledge was very, very useful, and now I kind of it's one of those things I keep appealing to now in various different areas.
Yeah, it's one of the things you see it everywhere. And, yeah, I mean, it's the same reason that, like, AI is not gonna recreate that passion and that moment. It's not gonna create that connection. I mean, maybe it will someday. Maybe we'll have androids that are so human-like that we won't know the difference. But giving a shit is about the stuff is way more important than the content.
Mm.
So, like, if the AI can't get students to give a shit or, just it's one of the reasons I think that, like, used bookstores are still really cool even though we have Amazon. I can go to Amazon app and I can look at all kinds of books, but what I'm not gonna get I may stumble across something, but I'm not gonna get how it feels to hold a book.
Mm.
I'm not gonna get how it smells.
Yes.
I'm not gonna get the, like, unruly stack of books in the corner that's, like, also very charming.
Mm.
Like, the quirky owner who, like, is just a total goofball who I love, like, who's setting books aside that they think you'll like because 'cause you're a regular, like, all those
Mm.
things, like, feeling of belonging, like, none of that is in my Amazon app, none of it. So it's different. I think part of it is we worship efficiency. So, like, as efficient as that stuff is, and efficiency is great, it leaves off the local knowledge, it leaves off the, like, weird connections, the idiosyncratic stuff, the stuff that you stumble upon, the sort of, what's the word? I don't know, like, the whimsical side of life is just sort of like there's not an algorithm for that. It
Mm.
just isn't. And that's I mean, I have moments like that too, where I, like, remember a lecture or a comment or, like and it just stuck in my mind. It motivated me to be a better learner. It inspired me in a way that just I've never been moved by Claude or ChatGPT. I
Mm.
just like, I just haven't.
Yeah, yeah. No, and it's the unusual and idiosyncratic weighting of the information that we've received as well. Like, the particular passages of books that stick out to you, like because of something totally like weird in your own personal history or something like that, like spotting something that maybe is a very, very minor point in a book, but nonetheless kind of really sticks with you. Like I use the example of when I was reading a bit of Max Stirner for a video. There's this throwaway comment he has at the end of the first section. He outlines like 3 stages of life. It's all very like mid-19th century continental philosophy stuff. And then he kind of offhandedly says, "Oh, and there might be a 4th stage for an old man, but like I'm not an old man yet, so I don't know what that stage of life would look like." And I just remember thinking, that's such a like that is such a minor point that it would never make it into like a kind of summary of Max Stirner's work that could then be fed into an AI model and kind of regurgitated back out at you, because it's like it's just a throwaway remark. But I think that it had such an insight, it had such an impact on the way that I viewed the rest of the book, because just the fact that he was willing to make this kind of offhanded, slightly kind of sardonic, witty remark then colored the whole rest of the reading. I'm a big fan of like these kind of idiosyncratic things you pick up reading primary sources that like just cannot be captured, because if you were going to like take as objective a standpoint as you could and be like, oh, what's the most efficient way of conveying this information? Then yeah, that would kind of be irrelevant because it's in one paragraph and it never comes up again. But like, it so colored the rest of my reading. It was personally very valuable.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's AI is, I sort of think of it like it's like homogenized milk. You know what you get? It's pretty consistent. It's very safe. It's very efficient. And it's valuable for a lot of things. But it's not very good for the whimsy, the flavorful, the accidental, the good fortune, but like happy accidents. It just leaves those off, right? Happy accidents, I think, are pretty cool. Whimsy, like where would life be without whimsy? If everything was optimized and there's a kind of like there's no discovery of wonder. This is why people aren't creative anymore, I think, because we filled up all those times where you would like get cool ideas with stimulation of some kind. I've got to be listening to something. I've got to be like listening to a podcast or like watching something or playing a game on my phone or doing something, as opposed to just like staring off into this like into space and just wondering like why something is the case, And I'm like, cause I get some of my best ideas when I'm like brushing my teeth or just doing something stupid. And I think, oh, that's a giant waste of time, right? I should outsource that out of my like I need to find a better way of using my dishwashing time. And the assumption is like maybe or maybe that is about
I unfortunately get so many of my best ideas when I'm just about to fall asleep. So I just kind of like scramble around for my notebook. I have one by the side of my bed, and then like slam on my reading light and scribble it down, and then try to go back to sleep again.
No, I was just gonna add to that, and then the fun part is like the next morning trying to decipher what it was that you scribbled down. Like,
yes, yeah, and
is that an N?
And like sometimes it's rubbish. Like sometimes it's like this idea that's hit me while I'm half conscious that I thought was really clever, and then I wake up and it just reads like incomprehensible bollocks of no particular substance. But sometimes it ends up being good. But yeah, no, there's a lot of like lack of stimulation creativity that I think could be tapped into. Something that I ask at the end of every one of these interviews, which is always good fun, is what's the most interesting idea that you've come across in the past year and why?
My own or somebody else's?
Either.
That's interesting. I'm in the middle of reading John Cottingham's work. He's a British philosopher. Does other stuff too, like Descartes. Does a lot of Descartes stuff. The idea that even our longings and desires might be, whether it's for justice or whether it's for love or whether it's for companionship, like our longing, that is somehow evidence for theism. I think is like quite a striking idea. That like that this like kind of taking Freud and Marx and turning them on their head, where like Freud and Marx will be like, oh, religion's the opium of the masses, or Freud will be like, yeah, that's just like wish fulfillment, or you're afraid of death or something, sort of psychologize away these sort of existential and spiritual needs. That actually they might just be very good evidence for like some pretty decent evidence for theism or something like theism. Yeah, I've been digesting that one. It's sort of riddled throughout his philosophy of religion work, and it's one of the sort of fulcrums he uses in his books. But I think it's criminally neglected in philosophy of religion. Like, I know, like C.S. Lewis has some similar stuff, but Cottingham actually takes it and runs with it, which I like. And it's something that I don't think philosophers of religion have really fully digested. I think it's criminally underdeveloped in literature.
Hmm. Oh, I'll have to check that out. So I only know Cottingham's work on Descartes, so that sounds really, really interesting. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been a really, really interesting chat.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It was really fun, Joe. Thanks for having me on.
And your Substack and everything will be linked in the description. So everyone, please go check it out. It's really, really good reading.
Yeah, if you just search my name, Jimmy Alfonso Licon, Licon, like on Google, there's like a million things that will come up. So you'll find plenty of stuff. Just Google me everywhere. I'm like McDonald's, baby. I'm everywhere.
Oh, brilliant. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This has been absolutely fascinating.
Cool. Thanks for having me, Joe.